Welcome. Everybody's filtered in here, and I'm sure more people will join at the last minute. But it is 5:01, so let's get started. Awesome. Well, welcome to BDN Events Online. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Melanie Brooks, and I am joined by my co-host tonight, John Holyoke, and we are really excited to have Paul Doiron here with us tonight as our special guest. So John has worked for the BDN since 1993, and for the last 18 years, he has covered the Maine outdoors as a columnist, a feature writer, and outdoor editor. And I just wanted to thank him for joining me tonight. It's really fun to have sort of a live interview experience, and he's going to be taking this interview and the questions that Paul answers and turning them into a story. And I will absolutely be sure to share that story with everybody in attendance tonight. So thank you for coming. For those of you who are BDN subscribers, thank you so much for your support. And welcome to all of you who might be joining BDN Events Online for the very first time. We typically have about one of these a week, sometimes two. And so if this is your first event, I hope it isn't your last event. We actually have another event on Thursday with poet Richard Blanco. If you are the literary type, you might think about coming to that one as well. For this event, we have partnered with Left Bank Books, and I saw Nancy is in this event. So hi, Nancy. Thank you so much for your help. If you'd like a signed copy of One Last Lie, please contact Left Bank Books, and I'll be sure to share the website and the telephone number in the follow-up email for you all to reach out to them. Many of you have probably used Zoom in the last couple of months or so, but I'm just going to point a couple of things out. You were all muted, and that's because there are 72 of you here. And if you were not muted, it would be very hard to hear our special guests. We are going to listen to John ask Paul some questions about his new book. But if you guys have questions, and I really hope that you do, please use the chat function that you can find at the bottom of your screen. You might need to move your mouse around, but it's a little chat bubble. Please send your question in here, and I will ask Paul your question on your behalf. I'm just going to type a little welcome message to everybody. Don't be shy. This event is for you to ask your questions to John, to Paul. You can ask John questions too if you want to. But since so many of you are here and you're not here to see me talk, I'm going to pass the baton to John and let him introduce our special guest and ask him some questions about his new book. So John, take it away.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Thank you. Before we get started, I'd point out that this is my interview with Paul that is going to turn into a story about his latest book, but this is your chance to be a part of the interview as well, and we're looking forward to this. It's kind of an experiment on our part. Let me introduce you to Paul. Paul Doiron is, as you probably know since you're here to listen to him talk, he's a best-selling author of the Mike Bowditch series of crime novels, which are set in the Maine woods. Seems like just yesterday I was talking to him about The Poacher's Son, the first book. This is the 11th in the series. It's unbelievable. One Last Lie is going to become available on June 30th. He's the chair of the Maine Humanities Council. He's editor emeritus of Down East Magazine of Maine, and he is a registered Maine guide specializing in fly fishing. I'll point out, if you see him daubing his face a little bit right now, that was a battle injury he just told me about, where he took a stick to the nose when he was up at Libby camps here recently, and so that's what's going on there. And I'm really pleased to be here, Paul. Thank you very much for coming and sitting down and telling us some stories.
Thanks, John. It does feel like it was just yesterday that you and I talked about The Poacher's Son, and when you write a book a year, it's amazing how fast the year goes, you know. But it's also a really cool thing because it's late June, which means I have a new book out, and the only thing different this time is that instead of going and, you know, to bookstores around the country and doing the usual, you know, sit at a table or stand at a podium, everything is Zoom based, and it's a brave new world for all of us, including novelists.
Now let's get here. Start my question. Here's what the format's going to be. First off, I'm going to ask a series of questions here. We expect that's going to take 25 minutes or so. And then we hope that the last half hour, people that are here have some questions for Paul, and you'll be welcome to ask your questions. The big question, now this is the most popular question I ever get about you from everybody in our office, everybody that sees one of your books sitting on my shelf. So from the horse's mouth, Paul, I got to know, how am I supposed to pronounce your last name? And how do I pronounce your protagonist's last name?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what's easier. I pronounce my name Doiron. So it's almost like there's a W in there. When I was a kid, my dad had, as a lot of French people did, had just sort of given up trying to pronounce it in the French way. And so I grew up pronouncing it Doiron. And later in my life, I kept hearing my great aunt pronounce it in a more French way. And I said, I'm going to pronounce it in a more French way. So if you meet somebody, though, with this last name, I guarantee you we all pronounce it differently. So there's probably no right or wrong way to do it. And I don't take offense when it's mispronounced. As far as Mike's last name, I pronounce it Bowditch because I saw it written before I heard it pronounced, and that was just the way it sounded in my head. And it was based on the cemetery on Route 1 in Searsport, which a lot of people know. And of course, subsequently, I've met a lot of people with that last name, and they all pronounce it Bowditch. So Mike is a Bowditch, and I don't know if he's the only one.
That's good. People in my family, even aunts and uncles, pronounce my last name differently than I do too. So I'm familiar with that phenomenon. It's the way it sometimes works. Now, first question. Everybody writes a blurb. You have a blurb about, well, you understand from having been interviewed me before, I'm not a big story stealer or a secret giver. I want people to go buy the book. But if you have a blurb that kind of describes what One Last Lie is, and I know there's some geographic stuff that Sarah and I and you just spoke about that might be worth mentioning. Can you give us the 45-second, the elevator talk of, hey, what's this book?
Yeah, sure. So the book, actually, it's the first of the series to start out of state. Mike is in Florida, where as a warden investigator, he's doing a background check on an applicant to become the new chief warden pilot. And that guy is living down there. And this is something that wardens actually do. They travel out of state to do these background interviews. And so Mike is trying to figure out whether this guy that has applied for this job is actually as good as he seems. And I don't think this is much of a spoiler to say he's not. And Mike figures it out. So we get a little display of Mike's investigatory prowess at the very beginning. But most of the book takes place in Maine. I mean, things move back to Maine because Mike gets a phone call while he's down there from his friend, Ora Stevens, who's married to Mike's mentor, Charlie Stevens. Charlie, while Mike has been away, began to behave strangely after visiting a flea market, a pop-up flea market, which is on the Machias Dike, which those people who have gone down east would know. And something happened there, and it caused him to go off. And Aura doesn't know where he's gone, and she asks if Mike can track him down for her because she's worried about him. And it leads north and into an area of Charlie's past that Mike was unaware of, having to do with a cold case in the St. John River Valley. So we start the book in the southeasternmost county of the United States, and we end the book in the northeasternmost county of the United States. So my readers who have been wanting me to go to the county and especially to the valley, I hope I've captured it for you.
Now I'm struggling to not jump ahead because I just that was not that is one of the questions, but it wasn't the way I thought we might go at the beginning. But I'm going to jump ahead anyway. You introduce readers to different parts of Maine every book, and this time around it's St. John Valley and a little bit of the town of Allagash. What did you find out in your research on that area that you really wanted to come through in one last slide?
Boy, there's a few different things. As I say there's an author's note in the book. My great uncle was the parish priest for many years in Sanagat, which is sort of more or less due south of Fort Kent. And so I have a family connection up there. And in fact, actually, when I began going up there over the past 5-6 years, people knew my great uncle, and I felt like I was sort of being welcomed as a family person, because also, Doiron is an Acadian name. That's an Acadian flag behind me, and so I do have some Quebecois in me too, but I'm primarily Acadian. I wanted the culture of the valley is unique. It's an outpost of old Acadia. When the British deported so many of the Acadians at the end of the 18th century, there was a band that sort of fled into the wilderness, and they created the community of Madawaska, which is centered around the St. John River. And it's persisted as a unique place because a lot of New Brunswick was, of course, settled by the Loyalists. Who were English speaking. And when I was up there on my last research trip before I finished the book, I was talking with somebody, and I happened to sort of say, Aroostook County, and she said, "We're not Aroostook County, we're the Valley." And I loved that because it was like, yes, those sort of distinctions matter. And I think, for somebody who's never been that far north, people in southern Maine just really don't have an appreciation for kind of what happened. They sort of think that Maine gets more and more forested and wild the further north you go. And and then they get to parts of Aroostook County where there are just some beautiful houses and subdivisions and green lawns, and it can be quite civilized seeming, and that was something I wanted to get across as well. But it's just a very different culture. It's you hear less French, I think, than you used to, but oh God, there's so much that I tried to sneak into the book, but I also had to tell a story about a murder. So there was that too.
That's right. A little aside, I spoke with somebody in the town of Allagash years ago, and it was snowing like crazy there that day. And I said, "What's going on? There's like 14 inches of snow on the ground. I thought it was going to only snow 4 inches." And they said, "No, that was Fort Kent. It can snow a foot in Allagash, and nobody in Fort Kent knows. We're down the road enough."
Well, and that's
we got a different weather systems here, and there's so few people that live there that it's just another day in Allagash.
Well, and Allagash identifies itself from its Scots-Irish heritage. Right. So there's that's a real hard line there between Fort Kent and Allagash, that way.
Now, one of the interesting devices that you've used over the years is that you said you set out to write this series where each book was set in a particular month. Mm-hmm. So one last lie, what's our month? And I mean, when you go to some of the stuff you did with winter months, I mean, you could absolutely feel the cold when you're reading your accounts. What was it about this month? What month did you have in mind for this one? And what were you trying to get across of what it's like in Maine?
Well, I had, this was book 11, And so I'm down to 2. I was down to June and December. My contract calls for a 13th book, so I'm going to have to invent a month or change my plans here. But I wanted to actually set it in late June because I wanted to talk a little bit about how things are warming up, and given the last week we've had, I was just up in the county Friday, and it was 95 degrees, and so it's June, and so this feels very much like a summer book in a way that I could have written a June book that would feel wintry, but the world is changing, and I really wanted to capture the fact that something was kind of askew. And of course, Mike had just come from Florida, so it's almost as if he can't escape the swamp, the heat of the swamp. He leaves the Everglades and arrives in the valley, and it's still damned hot. That was part of the intent.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Now, in this book, you talk about an unsolved cold case. There's an undercover warden who's trying to infiltrate a band of poachers.
Mm-hmm.
The results turn tragic. I mean, I thought one of the things you really got to very well, and you captured very well, was how thin the line is. I know you've dealt with and interviewed and just spent a lot of time with Maine game wardens, but what I think you captured here is how thin the line can be between success as a warden, or an undercover warden in this case, and complete life-ending failure.
Yeah.
What inspired that storyline, and what's the thought behind what you're getting across here?
Well, of course, one of the original inspirations was the very controversial news stories that that broke a couple of years ago about the Maine Warden Service conducting some raids in Allagash. That was kind of a jumping off point for me. This is not me telling that story, it just sort of planted a seed, and I got to thinking about undercover wardens, and I said, oh, I really want to. Mike is a warden investigator. Theoretically, he could go undercover, except my God, you would think that given everything he's done over the course of the series, he would be like the most recognizable game warden in the state of Maine. So I don't see him doing much undercover work. So I had to create another character who would do that work. And I got to talk to the investigators and to the colonel and lots of other wardens about what that's like. It's an interesting thing because, of course, the wardens are investigating primarily fish and game sorts of infractions. But, the reality is that people who are inveterate poachers tend to break other laws pretty freely and happily around narcotics and all kinds of stolen property and all kinds of other sorts of things. It's not like, you decide, oh, I will only violate these laws. It's like, no, kind of violating laws is a way of life. And as more than one game warden has talked to me about, somebody says to me, when I go into the woods in November, everyone I meet is armed. And, that made an impact on me. And I thought, man, that's hard, especially if you're—
Not only are they armed, but they're armed, and there's not help for sometimes 100 miles.
Right.
Not like in calling another cop. I mean, you're on your own.
Yeah, and in fact, that's another thing that wardens talk to me about, is that they will attend conferences and training sessions with other law enforcement, and when they talk about sort of their jobs and the fact that they're driving around in these remote places by themselves, these city cops are like, what? I mean, they find it terrifying because as hard as it is to be an officer in an urban area, as we're finding out, as complicated as it is to be an officer in an urban area, there are lots of cops around. Nobody's too far away. Sometimes there are too many cops around. So yeah, it's just a whole different, side of law enforcement to talk about. And that's what one of my goals with the series is to educate readers about an area of life that they probably just don't know very much about.
It seems like every time I talk to you about a book, Paul, I ask the same question or a variation of it. Mike he's getting a little bit mature, more mature every book, but it's never a straight line progression. You said it's more 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
This time I thought perhaps it was because he was doing so much of the work on his own time and not on his work time, that he didn't have his superiors after him all the time. Do you ever find yourself missing the more impetuous, unpredictable Mike?
Yeah, I do actually. It's sort of hard to kind of show that he still has a few of those instincts. I will spoil this much. There's a boat chase in the book in which Mike is kind of flying by the seat of his pants, and I think you see a little bit of the old Mike in that scene. Because I want him to be consistent. I want him to still have a little bit of that impulsiveness in him, and which is also in Charlie Stevens. Charlie's an old guy, but he likes he's a little reckless, and he likes taking risks and pushing the envelope and sort of seeing what he can get away with. And that was the thing, of course, that drew them together, is that they were birds of a feather. Rhyme.
I thought Charlie really, he's kind of kept it under wraps for several books, but this book has him acting like kind of a young buck again. He's out taking some chances.
He is, yeah. That was one of the things that I wanted to do was, as Mike has gotten older, it's like an experience that we have as children, right? Which is that our relationships with our parents, whether they're our real parents or in this case sort of a surrogate father, change as we get older. And one of the things that happens with this is that Mike learns a little bit more about Charlie's past, things he just had no idea about. But he also he's also coming to a different relationship with Charlie. Charlie's always been his teacher, and Mike is beginning to realize that actually he's learned a lot of these things already. He doesn't need a teacher as much as he used to. He needs a friend, of course, and he needs
right.
a mentor in other ways. But he's grown up, and that's what the book is about. Mike sort of kind of going through this as a competent, capable guy who can handle things.
Here's one for you. It's a little off the beaten path. It seems to me that as I'm reading the books, each book seems to have a few more passages that are pretty in-depth about different species of birds. If I didn't know better, I'd say that the author might be an avid birder himself.
Are you thinking of something in particular?
There's a bunch of birds that come up. I'm like, hey, Paul's talking about birds again. All right. But I learned a little bit about many birds, not anything specific, but you are a birder, correct?
Yes, I am. There was a time where I didn't call myself a birder. I used to say my wife is a birder. But I go along with her on all of these trips, and actually, as we were talking about, I was just up at Libby's camps, north of Katahdin, and as I often do when I'm in the woods, I just keep a log of everything that I see and hear. And I had 20-something bird species at the cabin, and I realized I had only seen 2 of them. Everything else I had identified by its song or its call. And that actually took me aback. I'm like, wow, I really picked this stuff up. When did that happen, you know?
That's right.
It was like I heard a Swainson's thrush, and it was like, that's not a hermit thrush, you know? And it was like, it must be a Swainson's thrush. And then it made me think twice. It's like, where did I learn the call of a Swainson's thrush? I don't remember that.
Somewhere over the last 11 years it's happened, because I don't recall the books being like that 11 years ago, 11 books ago, 10 years ago.
Right.
Now, here's the last question I'll ask for right now, because I want to get the viewers a chance. And it's totally selfish. And I'm lucky I get to do this. And everybody that's tuned in, this is how I always wrap up the interviews with Paul. I mean, we're usually about a week away from the launch of the next book. They come out in June every year. And I say, okay, so what's next? Can you give us any hint about the book that we know you're working on the next one.
What can I don't know. Well, I will tell you, he survives the...
He survives to go in and do another book.
It's not being told retrospectively at his wake. What can I say?
You give us a month, maybe. What's the next month? What's our last one?
I'm convinced. I'm sticking to my 12-month thing, so I can at least do that. So this is my Christmas book, although it's not very Christmassy. It's interesting, sort of having to transition from writing a summer book to a winter book, and again, and making it feel real to people who know winter in Maine.
Yep.
I don't know. We'll see what other people ask, and I'll decide how comfortable I am sort of sharing some of the details.
That's fine. I always put you on the spot, and you're always a good sport about it, so I appreciate that. With that, Melanie, you can open the floodgates and do what you want to do with our viewers and see what gets asked.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We do have some questions here from your fans. And I'll start with Deb's, because it kind of made me chuckle when I read it. And she likes to listen to your books, Paul, on audiobook. And she wonders if you or the publisher have any input on how the narrator pronounces the Maine place names, because sometimes they can get it really wrong.
Yeah, well, I've had only 2 narrators over the course of the series. And in fact, the guy who's taken over has re-recorded the first book so that everything now is consistent. And we're pretty good now about if he will send me a list of places he's not sure about, or last names that he's not sure about, and then I will try to spell stuff out phonetically. But there are some things he missed over the years, but it's a process, and I think that I hear that comment quite a bit, but on the other hand, I also hear how much people appreciate his narration. So I feel lucky that way too.
Absolutely. A question that came in from Kathy is, she knows that you have tried to cover all areas of Maine as you share Mike's stories. Are there areas that you feel still need to be included in Maine in a future book?
Yes, I've some of the obvious ones is Baxter State Park, for instance. Another one would be Acadia National Park. That's a complicated situation because, of course, it's a federal park with its own law enforcement, and the relationship of Maine game wardens to the rangers there is its own story element. It's been tough to write about southernmost Maine because it's so built up. Game wardens. There are game wardens. There's a game warden for downtown Portland, and that person stays plenty busy. But it's hard to create it's been hard for me to create a novel plot that would put Mike there, for instance. But yeah, there's a lot of places around Maine still I haven't gotten to.
A couple of people have emailed and chatted in that they think it's time for a TV series or a movie series or a movie about Mike Bowditch. And Mari wants to know, if Mike was turned into a TV series or a movie, who do you think would play him, or who would you like to see play him?
Yeah, that's a question I hear a lot, and the funny thing is that I've been hearing it since The Poacher's Son, right, when it first came out, which was 2010. And some of the actors that I thought might play Mike back then, are now going gray. So it's hard because you have to sort of think to yourself, oh, well, if they were going to start with The Poacher's Son, this would be somebody who'd have to convincingly be able to play a 24-year-old, so it would be an up-and-coming young male actor, and I just don't know who that would be. I mean, there's no one obvious in my mind. I always ask for suggestions. I was like, well, who do you think? Who have you seen that you think would play that role well?
A couple of people would like to know what and who you enjoy reading.
Oh, on the mystery front, one of the things that was hard was that two of the authors that I always cited have died in the last 5 years. One was P.D. James, and the other was the Swedish writer Henning Mankell, who created Wallander. The BBC made, or I guess it was the BBC, made an adaptation of the Wallander books starring Kenneth Branagh. I like, let's see, Michael Connelly. And I think actually the show they've made about his books, Bosch, is sort of the dream, as far as I'm concerned about. It just feels like the books, at least in my mind. I like Walter Mosley. I like James Lee Burke. I have to say, I am a big fan of J.K. Rowling's mysteries that she writes under the Robert K. Galbraith pseudonym. It's unfair that she can do that too.
Lisa wants to know, have you ever started taking Mike Bowditch in a certain direction in your storyline and then decided, nope, this just isn't going to work and have to start all over? She's curious how many dead ends you come across when coming up with the plots and predicaments for your characters, mainly Mike.
I've been fortunate that I haven't gotten halfway through a book and had to chuck it out or something. There's always a place when I'm writing a novel where until I get there, I'm pretty nervous that it's not going to work. And then once I get over that ridge, it's like, I have this tremendous sense of relief. It's like, okay, this is all this is going to succeed. I can see that I will be able to make this thing happen. When John asked about the book I'm working on, I have not yet reached the ridge. Hopefully pretty soon I'll have that moment where I'm like, okay, I can see it. It's going to come together. So not a lot of false starts so far, knock on wood.
You're lucky. That's great.
Yeah.
Althea says that she loves your books and hope you continue to write one a year, but she's curious, have you ever or do you have an interest in writing any different types of books?
I'm certainly always, thinking about stories, and sometimes I'll think about something and say to myself, that doesn't feel like it's a Mike Bowditch story. So far, though, one of the things that I've noticed about because I'm focused so much on Mike's evolution as a character, you know, that he's growing up in the books and that nothing's static in his life. It's kept my interest in him, and I hope in a way that, you know, keeps the interest of readers as well. I'm not tired of him. I'm not bored with him, because, you know, each book is sort of a new chapter in his growth, toward the person that he's ultimately meant to be. So you know, I'm aware of enough series where you can you know, you'll be reading a novel in an ongoing series, and you just can feel that the author would rather be doing something else, but, you know, is maybe contractually bound to write another one, and they're just not feeling it, you know. I don't want to be that guy.
Bert wants to know what the attitude, if there's an attitude or from the warden service towards your books. Have they reached out to you, or?
Oh, yeah. I you know, it's changed a lot over the years. I think when I first started writing the books, I didn't have a lot of connections in the warden service, and I don't know that they even noticed. Then when they began to hear about the books, they were like, well, who is this guy? Who, you know, is he related to somebody in the service? You know, how does he know some of these things? And as time has gone on, you know, I have gotten a readership. I feel like there's, you know, there are wardens who are real fans of the books, and I think they're fans of it because I try to present a view of their jobs that's balanced. You know, as I always say, in my books, there are good wardens and bad wardens and indifferent wardens, just like there are in any profession. And the fact that that everybody isn't a hero or a villain, I think resonates with wardens, because they also get frustrated with their, you know, some of the people they work with and some of the bureaucrats and the stuff they have to deal with. You know, I think I don't hear as much from the wardens maybe who don't like the books, and I certainly don't hear anything from the wardens who don't read the books. Mm-hmm. So it's, yeah, but I've really enjoyed that aspect of getting to know them in their jobs. It's a fascinating job. I mean, I'm constantly interested in hearing what's new, and, you know, and some of the new challenges they're facing, and it's kind of an endless just source of potential material and stories. It's great.
Melanie, I'd say this too, having interviewed a lot of wardens in the course of my job, I've never heard any of them say, oh, that Paul Doiron, he doesn't know what he's talking about. The ones who mention the books all seem to enjoy it and all seem to feel like he's getting it right. I've not heard any criticism from them. They might be more apt to tell me they don't like him, be apt to tell him, but they haven't done that in the least, not a bit.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
Jody wants to know what it's like to work with an editor. What is your relationship like with your editor?
It's probably different than a lot of people imagine. You know, one thing that's unique about my situation is that I used to be an editor myself, and I used to deal with lots of writers who I knew were not going to like what I had to tell them about the piece they had turned in, and so I was on the receiving end of a lot of fire that way, and I think that's made me more sympathetic to my editor's job. I know that my editor and my editors, my agent, you know, we all have the same goal, which is to make the best book possible. So, I keep my ears open. When they tell me things, I know it's for my own benefit, and I might have a momentary feeling of but after that passes, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, they're right. My editor-in-chief sort of tends to focus on the editor that I work with focuses on the sort of big picture things in the book. Is this character successful? How is the pacing? A lot of the line by line stuff is dealt with later with copy editors and that kind of thing. And then my agent actually also, she's a former editor, and she weighs in with just sometimes mind-blowing insights. I'm lucky that she too is a resource, for my books.
Sounds like a good team effort.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly how I would describe it.
Helen wants to know where there might be pockets of people across the country that read your books. I know that they all take place in Maine. I don't know if you know this answer, but where else do they sell a lot of copies, or do you do readings and people come?
Yes, I mean, if this were a sort of a normal year, I would be traveling to certain regular places. The Poison Pen in Scottsdale, Arizona is a mecca for mystery readers, and there's a bookstore like that in Houston. This book takes place in Florida, so I would be going to Florida to hit a couple of bookstores there. But then, yeah, there are these pockets. I mean, obviously there's a lot of concentration of readership in Maine, but also just the greater Northeast, because Maine is more familiar, right, to people who live up this way. But sometimes I'll have access to demographic information, and I'll see that there's a not insignificant cluster of readers in Denver or St. Louis or Dallas, or places sometimes that I can't quite figure. And usually the reason for those is that there's an independent bookstore there that the owner has just really embraced the series and has turned on all of his or her readers to Mike Bowditch, and so you see sales in these kind of not out of the way, but far-flung locales.
Without giving anything away, Vicki wants to know if Mike ever gets back with Stacy.
Read this book.
Okay. I was wondering if that was going to be the answer.
Yeah. No, you're not going to exactly have your answer, but you should read the book. Yeah.
Paul drives us all nuts with that. Every book, things switch and slide, and you wonder. It's one of the beautiful things about the series is we never know what's going on with that.